Okay, thank you for sticking around. It is 12:05. I really appreciate everybody joining us today. My name is Hussam Aldeeb. I'm the International Student Career Advisor here at Mohawk College. And today we have Elizabeth Long and Zia Sumar from Long McGalgee Immigration Law Group. So, the presentation that they'll be doing is all about the journey that students are going to take, as new international students, and obviously all the way up to permanent residency, hopefully. So without further ado, I'll give it to Elizabeth, and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here. So today we're going to talk about the immigration journey, as Hussam has talked about. And before we go into permanent residence, we will need to talk about the temporary residence, okay?
So for those of you who are here in Canada already and already have your study permit, it's really important to know what your expiry date is on that study permit, because you want to make sure that anytime you're here in Canada, you're keeping your status. Now, when you have an expiring study permit, it's really important to submit your extension application prior to that expiry date. Now, so long as you've submitted a complete and a proper application before that expiry date that's listed on your study permit, you'll hold what's called implied or maintained status while you're waiting for a decision on that extension application. So what this means is that if you're here, you're studying, you haven't quite finished your program, you need to extend your study permit. As long as you submit that study permit extension application prior to that expiry date, you'll be able to continue studying under that implied or maintained status while you're waiting for a decision on your extension application. But really important that you only get implied status if you apply properly. What that means is submitting a complete application, paying the right fees when you submit your application online. If you're missing a mandatory document like your passport, for example, that's not a complete application. And what happens then is if you don't apply properly, or if you happen to forget that expiry date and it passes, you lose your status. And what happens is if you've lost your status, there is a period of time where you can restore. So a restoration application is for someone who has lost their status and is now applying to get that status back. So when let's say you've missed your expiry date on your study permit, you have a period of 90 days from that expiry date to submit a restoration application. So, if your study permit expired, let's say September 30th, from then you would have the 90 days. So you'd still be in that restoration period right now, and you'd be able to go ahead and submit your restoration application to get that status back.
So Zia, I just wanted to sort of have some sort of practical examples. Now, the IRCC website recommends that people submit their application at least 30 days beforehand. Is that a requirement for them to do so?
No, it's not. So you're right. The IRCC website says that you must submit the application 30 days in advance of the expiry date that's listed on your permit. But by law, you need to submit that extension application prior to the expiry date. It does not have to be 30 days before the expiry date that's listed on your permit.
Okay, so if let's say my study permit expires April of 2023, April 30th of 2023, if I submit it April 29th of 2023, I would still have maintained status, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. What if I forgot and I submitted it and on May 1st, my study permit expires? Then what happens?
So if you forget, so now let's say we're on May 5th, May 6th, you realize that you've missed that expiry date, you do have a period of 90 days from that initial expiry date to submit your restoration application. But really important to make sure you don't miss that 90-day window.
Right. So if I had filed it before the expiry date, let's say April 29th, I can continue to maintain my study status. I can work in the summer. I can, even if my study permit is not processed by the time September rolls around, I can still study etc. Right?
That's correct. Yeah. So basically what maintain status means is that you're able to continue with the same conditions as your previous study permit while you're waiting for a decision on that extension application. Now, one caveat to that though, because you did bring up summer, one caveat to those that you do have to remain in Canada while you're on maintain status.
Yes, great. Okay, so, but what if I forgot and I filed that restoration on May 6th? Can I work during the summer?
No, unfortunately not. So if you miss that expiry date and you're filing a restoration application, you aren't able to study or work. So you basically are without status until that restoration application is processed and you get your new study permit.
Okay, guys, so make sure you always keep your status. Make sure your expiry date of your study permit is circled and you get all these reminders to file it before it expires. All right. The second thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is the concept of high-skilled versus low-skilled work experience. This week actually is when the IRCC put in a brand new system to define what is high-skilled versus low-skilled. When we talk about permanent residence, it will be very clear to you why, I'm telling you guys about this right now, because high-skilled work experience is highly valued for permanent residents, whereas low-skilled is not right now. And for the most part, in order for you guys to get permanent residence, you will need to have either a high-skilled work experience or a high-skilled job offer. So what is defined as high-skilled and what is defined as low-skilled? The Canadian government has put in a system under the NOC codes, NOC, National Occupation Classification Codes. And now there are 6 categories. So tiers 0, 1, 2, and 3, okay, that's going to be considered high skilled. And tiers 4 and 5 is low skilled. Compared to, so, one of the things about immigration is don't ask your friends for what they did or their advice, okay? Immigration laws change so much that what was applicable to them may very well be not applicable to you. So case in point, when the system changed this week, there are certain occupations before that didn't qualify people for permanent residence, such as truck drivers. There's a whole bunch of occupations. I can't list everything. I just put some of the things that might be applicable to some of you. So truck driver, nurses, aides, or person support workers, tattoo artists, dental assistants, etc. Before, those were considered low skilled. Now they're high skilled. Whereas there's other occupations that previously were considered high skilled last week. Now they're low skilled this week. And I put some interesting occupations there. This is the link for the complete list of how these two systems are now interacting. For those who have attended our webinars before, you would have been put on a newsletter list, and we did send out a whole bunch of information about this. I will be signing everybody who signed in for this to the newsletter, because that's the only way we can tell you about news that is coming up. So, things like this is what's there. Okay. Okay.
So we've looked at some of the more obvious conditions on your study permit, like the expiry date. There's also other conditions that are implied on that you're expected to know whether or not they're actually listed on the study permit itself. And one of those is that you must be actively pursuing your studies. And what that means is that IRCC is expecting that you're continuously making progress towards the completion of your program. Now, if you stop studying, whether that's because you finished your program early or you decided that you don't want to study anymore, you actually lose your status within 90 days. So, if your study permit, for example, is valid for another 2 years, but you finish your program early, that doesn't mean that you have status in Canada for those 2 years. What actually ends up happening is that your study permit becomes invalid 90 days following the completion of your program, or if the study permit is expiring earlier than that, then the expiry date that's on your study permit. But for going back to our example, if you still have 2 years left on your study permit, that study permit would become invalid 90 days following the completion of your program, or from when you stop studying. Now, there are 2 exceptions to that. The first is if you're on a scheduled break. So when we talk about scheduled breaks, what IRCC is looking at is the academic calendar for your program at your school. So we're not talking generally to say, okay, summers should be a scheduled break, and so anyone can stop studying during the summer. IRCC is very specific. They defer back to the school and they say, look at the academic calendar for your program at your school to determine when you have a scheduled break and when you're expected to be studying. The second exception is if you're on an authorized leave. So this is a leave that's actually been approved by the school. It can be for various reasons like medical, family emergency. There's many different reasons that you may need to take a leave, but it has to be authorized by the school. So it's not just, you have a family emergency and decide to withdraw from classes and say, what, I'm going to take this semester off. You actually do have to let the school know and get that authorized leave. And my recommendation is to make sure you have it in writing as well, because you will need it later on when you're trying to either extend your study permit or apply for your postgrad work permit to show that you did maintain your status while you're here in Canada. Now, big question we always get is, I'm here, I'm on my study permit, can I work? Am I able to use that study permit to work? Now, it's important that we look at it in 2 different parts. The first is what the rules were prior to November 15th and what the rules are today. First of all, only full-time students are able to work using their study permit. Now, prior to November 15th, if you were a full-time student, you were able to work up to 20 hours a week during the semester and full-time during any regularly scheduled break. So again, we're going back to the same definition that we just talked about when we were looking at scheduled breaks. Since November 15th and up until the end of December 2023, so we still have over a year to go, IRCC has put in a temporary policy that removes that 20-hour restriction for full-time students. So what this means is that anyone who either held a study permit on October 7th of 2022, had been approved for a study permit, or had a study permit application in process that eventually did get approved, they are able to work as many hours as they want while they're studying, regardless of whether it's during the semester or during the regularly scheduled break. So really important, there's 2 different rules that have been in place now in terms of how many hours you can work. But the common between that is that you do have to be a full-time student in order to qualify to use your study permit to work. Now, that ability to work using your study permit ends as soon as you've completed your program. So as soon as you receive any written notification that you've completed the requirements of your program, you're no longer authorized to work using your study permit. This is because you're actually no longer a student, right? You finished the program, you're no longer a student, so you do have to stop working immediately. Now, if you finish that program, but your plan is to start a second program, you can continue working as long as the break between your 2 programs is less than 150 days. You've already been accepted into that second program, and you either have the valid study permit that's not expired just yet, or you've already submitted your extension application and are awaiting a decision.
So Zia, just wanted to maybe talk about these things. So let's have some scenarios. I'm a student. I graduate in December of this year, and doing my final exams. Can I work?
Yeah, you definitely can still continue working while you're doing your final exams.
And because I've held a work permit even before October 7th, I can work full time.
I think you meant study permit, but yes, as long as you
Or a
have
study permit. Yes.
before October 7th, yes, you can be working full time while you're doing your exams.
Okay, excellent. Now, I have finished my exams. I don't have my grades yet. What can I work then?
You can still continue working, yes, because you still haven't received any confirmation that you've completed your program.
Okay, so now I've received a confirmation on my portal saying that I've completed. Don't have my transcripts. I don't have any letter from the school. I just got a confirmation on my portal that I completed. Then can I work?
No, unfortunately you can't. So as soon as there's any communication to you that you've completed your program, you do have to stop working. And, if your grades are released, if you have a notification in your portal, you decide not to check it, that's not reason enough to continue working. It is on you as the student to make sure that you're checking your portal, you're checking to see if your grades have been released. As soon as there's any written indication to you that you've met the requirements, you've completed your program, you do have to stop working immediately.
Okay. What if though I plan on studying in September or in like April or in the May semester, and I've already been accepted to a program then? Can I work at that?
Yeah, because you'd be in between programs, assuming that the length of time between the end of the first program and the start of the second program is less than 150 days, then yes, you are able to continue working during that interim period.
Okay, and we'll cover this in a bit, guys, but let's say I finished my program, I stopped working, and I intend to apply for my postgrad work permit. I apply for my postgrad work permit, then can I start working?
Yeah, I think you're going to talk about this in more detail in the next slide, but yes, definitely as soon as you apply for your postgrad work permit, you are able to start working full-time again.
Okay, excellent. All right, so let's talk about the postgrad work permit. The first thing is, the question is not when should you apply for the postgrad work permit, but should you apply for postgrad work permit, okay? The postgrad work permit is what I like to tell people is a golden ticket. Why is it a golden ticket? Because it is an opportunity of a lifetime. With that postgrad work permit, you have an open work permit, which means you can go to anywhere, any employer in Canada, and when they ask, can you work for us? You can say, yes, I can start working for you right away. It is very difficult to get a work permit in Canada because normally you have to have an employer who is offering you a job. And not only do they have to offer you a job, they have to apply for an LMIA where they can prove to the government that they can find a Canadian who's able and willing to do the job. And that can be quite difficult to do. So the fact that you don't have to do that, you get this open work permit to work for anyone that you want to, that's a golden ticket. And it's a once in a lifetime deal. You don't get access to another postgrad work permit. So if you can't immigrate and you can't get what you need, the work experience that you need, when your postgrad work permit expires, then you can't just go and apply to extend a work permit. You have to have a reason and you have to qualify for a work permit. So you can't just get another postgrad work permit, normally speaking. There has been some temporary policies this year and last year to allow people to do so by the government, but normally you cannot. And so because you're not going to fall under any of these special policies, you should take the assumption that you will only be eligible for this one postgrad work permit in your lifetime. And so when we're looking at planning out your immigration plan, we need to look at how long would your postgrad work permit be for? And if you can get the work experience in order to have a good chance to qualify for permanent residence and get permanent residence. So the length of your work permit, if it's under 2 years, 8 months to 2 years, it will be equal to the length of your program. If you have a 1-year program, for example, then you get a 1-year work permit. Now, if you have a program that is 2 years or more, you'll get a 3-year work permit. Or if you have a 1-year program and then you do another 1-year program, you can combine these programs together to then get a 3-year work permit at the end. When I'm talking about years, I'm talking about academic years. So most of the time, an academic year is 2 semesters, which normally means 8 months of study. Okay. So, and the other thing is the distance education program. So during COVID, there was a lot of exceptions made by the government as to how much you could study, online because of COVID, because of the programs were based on COVID, or if you're outside of the country, you could do that. Now, starting August of this year, starting this semester, the government has now come back for the most part to say distance education is supposed to be less than 50% of your program. Now, if you started your program beforehand during COVID, there are some exceptions. It's kind of complicated. I'm not going to get into it over here, but we can take a look and see whether or not you fit into the transition of provisions. But for the most part, guys, my advice to you is, especially if your program is right now, don't assume that you can just do distance education for over 50% of your program and qualify for postgrad work permit. You need to do at least 50% of your program in class in order to qualify for the postgrad work permit. Okay, especially if your program is starting from this semester. The second thing that you need to understand is you can only qualify for the PGWP if you maintain full-time status during every semester of your program. There is an exception for the last semester, and if you can get authorized leave from the school. Okay, if you don't show that you have full-time status, except for the 2 exceptions for every semester of your program, then the officer would likely reject your postgrad work. So you could have done all of your studying and not get that golden ticket at the end. Okay, so the authorized leave, as Zia had explained, is something that you need to get from the school for exceptional reasons. For example, let's say you need to take maternity leave, or you need to take care of a sick relative, you can't study. Whatever it is, you have to present it to the school and ask the school to give you authorized leave before you leave. Okay, you will then be able to take that entire semester off. It's only 1 semester that you can take off for the authorized leave. You take the entire semester off, you have the authorized leave, then the officer should be able to still qualify you for the postgrad work permit when you graduate from the program. It's very important to note that you cannot work full-time, part-time, anytime when you are on authorized leave, because you're not a full-time student at that point. Okay. Now, as we had talked about before, you can start working as soon as you apply for the postgrad work permit. Okay. Now, there are certain deadlines to apply for the postgrad work permit. If you miss the deadline, you will no longer be eligible to apply for the postgrad work permit based on the studies that you've done. The IRCC website says that the deadline is 180 days from the time you've completed your program. But I'm going to tell you not to think about your deadline as 180 days. I'm going to tell you to think about your deadline as the earlier of when your study permit expires or 90 days from the completion of your program. The reason why I'm telling you to do this is you lose your student status when your study permit expires or 90 days after you finish your full-time studies. So if you apply after 90 days, even if your study permit has not expired yet, you will have lost your status. You will not be able to work while you're waiting for your postgrad work permit, and you would have to file a restoration of status. Okay, so apply within 90 days of the completion of your program, and as long as your study permit is still valid. If your study permit expires before the 90 days, your deadline is expiry of your study permit. And for those of you who fall into a situation where your study permit is going to expire before you complete your program, go and file the extension of your study permit right now so that you can get a valid study permit when you graduate. And then your study permit normally should be valid for 90 days after you finish the completion of your program. Okay?
So Elizabeth, can we go back to some of the examples maybe we were talking about? So if someone, let's say, right now finishes their program in December, at the end of December, but their study permit is valid until August of 2023.
Right.
Valid, or the expiry date that's listed on there is for another 8 months.
Right.
For them, can they apply for their postgrad work permit in July, for example?
If they apply for it in July, well, that's even past the 180 days. Let's say if they apply in May, for example, right? Likely what's going to happen is they can't work while waiting for their work permit. So work permits right now take 5 to 6 months to process. So they're going to not be able to work while waiting for their work permit. And it likely will be rejected if they didn't file a restoration of status for their study permit. So you have to file extra fees. I think what, $200 for restoration, $150 for your study permit. You have to file the study permit, and you can't work while waiting for it. So the deadline for this case is 90 days. So if you graduate from December, count 90 days, sometime in March, that's your deadline. If you file it before that deadline, then you just need to file the work permit application. While you have your work permit, you can work while waiting for your work permit.
And now that 90-day timeline, does that still apply if my study permit expires on, let's say, January 10th?
No, you have to file while you have valid student status. So if your study permit expires, you don't have student status. So if your study permit expires January 10th, you have to file the postgrad work permit before January 10th.
Okay, great. And then you mentioned for the postgrad work permit, I need to have been a full-time student in every semester of the program. What if I decide that, you know what, I need to take a part-time semester because I'm overwhelmed, I have family stuff going on, I need just to take some time. I don't want to stop my studies, but I need to take some time for personal reasons.
So in that situation, my question would be, how important is it for you to get the postgrad work permit when you graduate and for you to stay in Canada and get permanent residence? If that is a major goal for you, then my advice would be to just ask for authorized leave, take the semester off, and then come back and be a full-time student. Because if you take this part-time, the officer likely would not have pity for you at the end and give you the postgraduate. They don't have to give you the postgraduate. Whatever reason you do a part-time student, they don't have to give you that exception. Sometimes they do, but I usually take the approach that immigration has no humanity. And so they don't care, okay? And so maybe you might get a nice officer who cares, but most of them don't. And so you are at risk of not being able to get a postgrad work permit at the end. And you may need to leave Canada, or you may need to study in another program and do another program. I don't know how many of you want to do that, okay?
Now, if I take an authorized leave, so let's say January semester, I take it off, For whatever reason, it's approved by the school. And the summer semester is usually a scheduled break for me. Is that going to be, do I have to go back to school then in the summer, or do I still take it off?
If it's a scheduled break, it's a scheduled break. You can take that off and then come back for the September semester.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, guys. Now let's move on to permanent residence. So the first system I'm going to talk to you guys about is express entry. Many of you already know about express entry. There's been a lot of changes and things happening for express entry, and there will be a lot of changes coming up as well. Like I said, we're signing you guys all up for the newsletter, which will give you news on what changes there are, important changes when it comes to be. But let me just sort of give you an overview of what express entry is. So in order to go through the express entry system, the first thing you have to do is create an online profile. And you get to do that if you qualify under one of three categories: federal skilled worker class, Canadian experience class, or federal skilled trades. When you create a profile, you get to be in the express entry pool. Now, very importantly, when you get into the express entry pool, you have not, I repeat, not applied for permanent residence, okay? When you're in the pool, you're a candidate to be invited, but you do not have the privilege of applying for permanent residence at that point. Your profile will remain in the pool for 1 year. If you are not invited to apply and you apply for permanent residence, then your profile will expire after 1 year. When you get into the express entry pool, you will get a score called the CRS score, okay? And it's based on your background and whether or not you have provincial nominee nomination from an express entry linked program. Not every provincial nomination will give you 600 points, only express entry linked provincial nominations, okay? Now, every 2 weeks or so, the government will do a draw and they'll invite people to apply. If you receive the invitation to apply, the ITA, only then can you actually apply for permanent residence, okay? Now, the invitations to apply, normally they're based purely on your score, the comprehensive ranking system. However, during COVID, for example, the government has looked at which category you qualified for. So for example, all last year, and for most of 2020, they were only looking at people who qualified under Canadian experience class. People who qualified under a federal skilled worker or a federal skilled, they didn't get invited. On the other hand, this year now, everybody, they've been looking at everybody. Next year, they may be looking at occupations. They may be looking at whether you have a job offer. It will likely change next year as well, okay? So let's first talk about how to qualify to get into the pool under the three different categories. The first category is called the federal skilled worker class. In order to qualify for this, you don't have to have any work experience in Canada. The work experience required for this is 1 year of high skilled, continuous work experience in one occupation that is full-time, which means at least 30 hours a week, and for at least 1 year, right? So this work experience is very different from the work experience that I'm going to talk about, which is the Canadian experience class. You can have this work experience without ever working in Canada. You can count overseas work experience. You don't have to be you can be a full-time student to get this work experience, for example. Self-employed work would count for this work experience, okay? Many of you may already qualify under federal skilled worker class because you may already have this work experience. Now, there are other things that contribute. You need to pass a language exam. You'll need to calculate your points to meet 67 points for federal skilled worker class. This is not express entry points, it's federal skilled worker points. And you need to meet financial savings as well. Okay. Now, the second category for people to qualify is called the Canadian Experience class. In order to qualify for this, the work experience is very different from the federal skilled worker class. For the Canadian Experience class, the work experience has to be 1 year of high skilled work experience when you are not a full-time student that is in Canada, and you have to be employed. Okay, so for this work experience, you don't need to be continuous. It could be different occupations. You have to be full-time, so at least 1,560 hours, which is equal to 30 hours on average per week. You could add part-time work hours to be there, but it has to be at least 1 year. It's very important that you can't get this work experience while you are a full-time student. And you have to be employed in Canada. So you can't be doing self-employed work. You can't, for example, go and work for someone and they say, okay, you know what, we're just going to give you cash and you go file your own taxes. Okay, that could very well be deemed to be self-employed work. Okay, so you need to have the proper work experience to qualify for Canadian Experience class. Keep in mind the criteria that I'm talking about for this work experience, because this kind of work experience is the criteria to get points for Canadian work experience under express entry as well. The third one is skilled trades. It's not very much used right now. It will require you to have either certification or LMIA. For the most part, for you guys, you'll qualify either under Canadian Experience class or federal skilled worker class. So let's say you've gotten into the pool. That's not the end of the story, okay? It's not just about getting into the pool. It's about, can you get out of the pool? So what are the points that contribute towards you being able to get out of the pool? Well, the first thing is age. Now, when you get to your 30s, your age points start dropping, okay? In your 30s, you're looking at -5, -6 points. In your 40s, fast slide down. Every time you get a birthday, it's not a happy birthday, you get a -10, -11. By the time you get to the 45th birthday, you can relax a little. You're not going to get any less points taken off. Okay, but that's because you're going to get a big fat 0 for your age. Compared to someone in their 20s who's getting 110 or 100 points, that's a big difference. So not a lot you can do about age, but apply as soon as you can. Education, if you already have a 3-year program, like a bachelor's program, and then you have another program like a Mohawk program on top, your points will jump. Language points, if you don't have Canadian work experience, right now you're looking at language points of at least a 7 in reading, writing, and listening, and 8 in, reading, writing, and speaking, 8 in listening for IELTS, or 9s for CELPIP. If you have Canadian work experience, your points may drop a little bit, but language is a very big differential as to whether or not someone has a good chance to go through express entry. Canadian work experience, same kind of factors that I was talking about with the Canadian Experience class. So this work experience has to be when you are not a full-time student. If you have a spouse, someone you're married to, or you're common law with, you've lived with for at least 1 year, and they have a work permit, and they're not studying, they could get this work experience, for example, and they may be able to qualify faster than you. Okay. Foreign work experience, high skilled work experience outside of Canada could give you some points. like I said, your spouse as well, even if they are not the principal applicant, but they have high education, high language points, Canadian work experience, that could contribute a little bit to your points. If they don't, then that may take away a little bit from the overall family points. Provincial nominee programs, we're going to talk about this. The only provincial nominee programs that will give you 600 points for express entry are the ones that are linked to express entry. They have to be express entry based. Previous study, so if you studied at Mohawk, you get 15 points for 1 or 2 year program. It's a 3-year program, you get 30 points. Arranged employment, you're not going to get this with a postgrad work permit. You can only get arranged employment if you have an LMIA or employer-specific work permits. If you have brothers or sisters who are Canadians or permanent residents, you get 15 points. And if you're fluent in French, that will give you significant points as well. I have a lot of people who tell me, oh, how about if I just start studying French right now? I don't know any French. I'm just going to start studying French right now. It's very nice, but in order to get the level of French that you need to be significant, it's going to, you're going to need to have the level where you can go to university or college. So it's not just a hi, hello, bonjour, that's it, okay? It's going to be as significant. So if you don't know any French, I probably wouldn't suggest that you take this on as the factor. You should look at the other things. Trade certification, that's for the trades, okay? So look at this. Maybe some of you may, be in a good position. Others may not be in as good a position. Let's look at some other things we can do. So provincial nominee programs are programs where the federal government has made an agreement with every province to allow each province to select people that they want to get permanent residence. The Ontario's provincial nominee program is called the OINP. And Ontario has 2 kinds of provincial nominee programs. They have express entry linked and non-express entry linked. So I'm going to talk to you guys about the express entry linked programs, and Zia will talk to you about the non-express entry linked. Okay, so with these programs, you can get 600 points if you are nominated, but you can't just go and apply directly with OINP. Okay, you can only apply if you are in the pool, express entry pool, and they issue you a notification of interest. How I like to explain to you guys is it's kind of like, let's say you guys know that dating site called Bumble, the one where guys can't just go and like contact women directly. The women are the ones who see who is in the pool, and if they like the guy, then they swipe right? And only if you get swiped right can you go and talk to the girl if you're a guy. All right, so this is like this. Okay, you can't just go and apply to OINP. You get to be in the pool, and then only if OINP swipes right on you, if they swipe right on you, they issue you a notification of interest. Then you can go and contact and submit your application to OINP. All right, so who is OINP going to swipe right on? There are 3 categories. The first, I think, is swipe right, right? Swipe right is good and swipe left is bad. Okay, swipe right is good. Okay, now, you see, I'm too old for this. Anyway, human capital stream. All right, the first one is basically you have to have a bachelor's degree. So if you have one from outside of Canada, that's good. They are kind of ambiguous as to who they want to invite. They have said that they really value tech workers. So if you have a background in one of the tech occupations, and they still look at how many points you have right now. So if your points are pretty high and you're in a tech occupation, they may swipe right on you. Okay. The others, sometimes they're looking at job offer, other occupations. They don't announce it beforehand which occupations they like, but they have invited for certain other occupations that they think is in demand. Second one, if you are French, fluent in French, and you also have a bachelor's degree, and your points are at a certain level, they might invite you. And the third is skilled trades. Now, this one's very interesting. So this one, you have to first be in the pool. Let's say you've worked for 1 year in one of the construction trades in Ontario, okay? Your points may not be as high, but because you worked for 1 year in Ontario in one of the trades, you qualify under Canadian experience class. For example, Ontario may say, well, we like you. We're going to swipe right on you and give you that notification of interest. And then you can apply with us and get 600 points added to your express entry. So no matter what score you had before, 600 points, you are guaranteed basically to be invited to apply. Okay. All right, Zia, you want to talk about non-express entry rates?
Yeah, so like Elizabeth said, when we talk about the provincial nominee programs and we look specifically on Ontario, Ontario has streams that work with express entry, which is what Elizabeth just went through. And then Ontario also has streams that work outside of express entry. These are non-express entry streams. Now, in all of Ontario's non-express entry streams, the process of applying through them is first creating an expression of interest. So Ontario has their own pool system. So you have to go in, create a profile. It's called an expression of interest. You go into the pool of candidates that is specific to your stream. Okay, so this is a little different than express entry. When we're talking about Ontario, Ontario has different pools for each stream that falls under their non-express entry streams. And so when you create an expression of interest, you go specifically into that particular pool for your stream. And in that pool, you're given, when you create your expression of interest, you're given a score. That score is based on criteria that's applied for your particular stream. So when we talk about these non-express entry streams, there's a total of 5 streams, and we'll get into the streams in a moment, but each of these streams has a different combination of criteria for points. Now, when we look at the international student stream, actually, they score you on all the criteria. Okay, so your Canadian work experience, where you studied, what your field of study was, your proficiency in the official languages, where do you have a job offer, what's the knock of your job offer, what's the wage, the location. So all of these are the factors that Ontario looks at, but in each of the streams, they're applied a little differently. And so when you create your expression of interest, like I said, you go into the pool for that particular stream, you get a score, and here again, Ontario is ranking everybody based on their score, and then from there, they're doing draws and issuing invitations to apply based on your score. Now, once you have an invitation, again, it's at that point that you're actually able to prepare and submit the application to Ontario. So that's the application for nomination. With regards to draws, they do happen throughout the year, but again, we don't have any announcements. Ontario doesn't make any announcements beforehand to say, okay, we're going to be doing this draw, or this is the minimum score that's going to be required for this particular draw. What happens is after the draw actually occurs, then Ontario posts an update to say, okay, we did a draw. This was the score that was required. This was the stream that we applied, that we selected from. So, you know, if you do qualify for any of these streams, if you are thinking about going through the Ontario program, it is important to get that profile created, go into the pool as soon as possible, because you never know when draws are going to happen or what the scores are going to be for draws. And right now is a very interesting time. So, you know, Elizabeth was talking earlier about the NOC and the new tier system that was implemented last week on November 16th. And so because of the new tier system, Ontario actually, in order to migrate to the new tier system, they have removed all the profiles, all the expressions of interest that were created before November 16th, and they've only reopened their portal again as of yesterday, November 22nd. And so anyone who had a profile before, they've been instructed to go back into the pool, to the portal, create a new expression of interest so that you go back into the pool. Because if you had a profile before, they haven't carried it over. So really important, if you are one of those individuals who had a profile before, you've probably got a couple of emails from Ontario. They've been sending them out over the last couple of weeks, but really important that you're going to need to recreate your expression of interest in order to be considered going forward. So anything before November 16th has been wiped from their system.
That's right. You know what? Time is just a blur for me. I was thinking that it just happened this week, but yeah, actually the new NOC system came into place last week. So Zia, I mean, and with the new NOC system, Ontario has also actually sort of readjusted their points allocations for different criteria. Can we just sort of talk about the kind of criteria that the Ontario system sort of values? And I didn't get into a whole chart because it's complicated with every category having different things.
Definitely.
But for example, I think one of the most significant ones for Ontario is they don't care about age, right?
Yes, that's one of the biggest differences we see. There's so many points in Express Entry that are allocated towards age, but in none of the point system for Ontario has age as a factor.
Another difference, I think, is also location study, right? If it's outside of the GTA, you lucky guys are in Mohawk. Outside of the GTA, Hamilton's outside of the GTA, you do get extra points for studying outside of GTA, and also your job offer. If it's outside of the GTA, you also get extra points for that, right?
Yeah, again, it does depend on the program that you're applying through, because depending on that particular program, these factors are applied differently, right? So when we're talking about the employer job offer international student stream, which we'll talk about more in a moment, but if we're looking at that international student stream, this is the one stream where every factor that Ontario has is applied to their point system. And so yes, your location of your job, your location of study, both of those do have a big impact on your overall score.
Okay, great.
So with that, let's take a look at what these streams are. I mean, we've kind of alluded to it, but let's take a look at which streams do fall under this non-express entry. Now, 3 of them fall under what are called the employer-based streams. So of the 5, 3 of them fall under the categories of employer-based. What this means is that you have a permanent full-time job offer from an employer in Ontario, and basically you're using that job offer to apply for nomination through Ontario. Now, each of the 3 streams are a little different, but we'll talk about the differences in a moment. What I want to focus on first are the requirements for the company. So for all of these employer-based streams, there's requirements on the company, requirements on the position, and requirements for you as the applicant. So when we're talking about the company does have to be in business for at least 3 years before they can support your application to Ontario. In addition to that, if they are outside of the GTA, then they need to have only in their past fiscal year, they have to show gross income of at least $500,000, and at the time of your application, they need to have at least 3 employees that are full-time, that are either Canadian citizens or permanent residents. If your employer is located inside of the Greater Toronto Area, then those figures go up a little bit. That gross income increases from $500,000 to $1 million in the past fiscal year, and they would currently need to have 5 full-time employees that are either Canadians or permanent residents instead of the 3. But again, these are the requirements for the company in order for them to be able to support your application. Now, let's talk about the different streams. So with the employer-based streams, the first one is the international student stream. And I think I've been talking about this a lot in the last slide, but the international student stream, this is for someone who has the permanent full-time, high-skilled job offer in Ontario. But you as the applicant, you do need to apply within 2 years of graduation from an eligible program. Now, really important, when we're talking about an eligible program, we're referring to programs that are at least 2 years in length, or you've completed a 1-year program that's at a postgraduate level. So what that means is that you needed to have a degree in order to be able to get admission to the program at your school. Now, really important is that right now, when Ontario looks at this 1-year postgraduate program, they're looking back to the school and saying, what was the admission requirements for that 1-year postgraduate program? And currently, the only admission, the only requirement that they'll accept is if the school required a degree. If the school said that you can get into this 1-year program with a degree or a diploma, or with a degree or work experience, those particular programs are ineligible for the international student stream today. OIMP is looking at changing that. They have put forth a motion to change, but we haven't actually seen that come to fruition just yet. So as of today, you either needed to have done a 2-year program or a 1-year postgraduate program that requires a degree as the admission requirement. The second employer job offer stream is the skilled worker stream. Now, for this program, you as the applicant, you need to have 2 years of work experience within the past 5 years, and that work experience has to be in the same occupation code as the job that you've been offered. So as the job that you're using to support your OIMP application. Now, really importantly, if we're comparing these two programs so far, the international student and the skilled worker, the international student program does not require any work experience. So as soon as you finish your studies here in Canada and you've graduated from an eligible program, you're able, and you have that job offer, you're able to start your OIMP application to the employer-based streams. However, with the skilled worker program, you need to have at least 2 years of work experience. But that work experience doesn't have to be in Ontario, doesn't have to be in Canada. It just has to be in the same occupation and within the past 5 years. The last employer-based stream is the in-demand stream. So this is a program where Ontario has actually listed occupations that qualify for this program. So where we talked about any high-skilled occupations for the international student or the skilled worker, the in-demand is very different. The in-demand actually includes low-skilled occupations, but it does have to be listed as part of their acceptable occupations for this particular program. Now, in addition to that, you do need to have at least 9 months of work experience in Ontario in that same occupation. The work experience doesn't have to be with your current employer, doesn't have to be with one employer, it can be with multiple employers, but it does have to be in Ontario.
So Zia, I mean, there's a lot of information, but maybe let's break it down and talk about some scenarios. In general, guys, these employer-based programs, they do take longer to process than express entry. So express entry, for example, if you can get an invitation to apply, we're looking at, in general, around a 6-month processing time. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but normally it's under a year, okay? For these kind of programs, once you get invited to apply, you only have 14 days to submit your application. So it's very, very fast. But then the Ontario government takes 3 months to 6 months to review. But then the federal government takes around 1.5 years to 2 years to evaluate. So you're looking at least a 2-year, if not more, processing time for this. Ontario's program requires you, especially these employer-based programs, to continue working for your employer until the decision is made. So you have to be committed to working for your employer until a decision is made. Express entry, they're backward looking. So if you finish your 1 year, I mean, and you can, go work for other people. So it's more flexible. Also, these programs for this employer-based ones, you have to get the support of your employer. Your employer, it's not an LMIA. They don't have to show they can't find a Canadian to do the job if you already have a work permit, but they do have to sign a form. They may need to provide some information to the government about their situation. And most of the time, the employers may not want to give you financial information, etc. So as lawyers, we can provide that firewall between the employer giving the information and yourself, and we can just submit it and not tell you you don't care anyway about their financial information. Okay. So it is more involved to apply for this. So why would you apply for this? Well, sometimes express entry is something where you may not get an invitation to apply. It's very iffy. You have to have 1 year of work experience, for example, to get the points, for example, and who knows what the points are going to be, and who knows next year if there's an occupation based, whether your occupation is going to be selected. You could do both. You could do express entry and this, and some people choose to do this. For example, international student class, you can apply without any work experience, as Zia has said. So you can apply right when you graduate, whereas express entry, you need 1 year of work experience. Skilled worker, Zia, what do you think are some of the reasons why somebody might consider a skilled worker?
Well, I think it comes down to, again, like you've talked about, right? What your points are going to be in express entry. Is that really going to be an option for you? We see that there's very different scoring systems between express entry and OINP. So where you may not be getting enough points in express entry, but you might be the perfect candidate for the skilled worker stream based on the Ontario point system, right? And so really it's a matter of looking and saying, what's going to be the best process for you based on your background, right? Looking at your points, looking at your experience, what's going to be viable for you to get your permanent residence. And so this is what we consider when we're going through a consultation appointment, when we're going through someone's background, we look to say what's actually going to be viable, what's likely going to be an actual route for you to get your permanent residence.
Yeah, and sometimes your spouse, don't forget about your spouse, okay? Because your spouse may not qualify under international student, but they may qualify under skilled worker or one of the in-demand streams as well. Now, since the NOC code changes, some of those in demand, which were previously low skilled, are now high skilled. So we may be able to, if you have a job as a nurse's aide, for example, you may be able to apply under in demand or international student stream. We can see which one you're more likely, or we can do both. You can put you into the pool for each stream, and you can see which one you might get invited to apply, for example. Okay. So I'm just want to briefly talk about the caregiver program. This program sounds good, but it is taking the government a very, very long time to process anything. For example, it opened in the latter part of 2019, and most of these applications have still not been processed. But it is something where a program right now, we don't know if it might change, but if you have 2 years of work experience in Canada, caring for a child, elderly, or disabled person in their home, they have to hire you directly. It shouldn't be through an agency. You have your 1 year post-secondary education credential, you meet the CLB benchmark for 5. Technically speaking, you could apply for permanent residence under this program. Okay, so we talked a lot about different programs. Just wanted to give you some advice about, practically speaking, what you need to do next.
Yeah, so I think the first one is really make sure that you have a plan as to what you really have to do. So know what your immigration goals are, know how you're going to get there, and know what it is that you will need to complete. And it's never really too early to be creating that immigration plan, because you don't know that right now, like Elizabeth was saying, don't forget about your spouse. You might be here studying, but your spouse might be the one that qualifies for permanent residence earlier than you actually finish your program, or you may be eligible for permanent residence and just don't even know it at this point. So it is really important. Sit down with an immigration lawyer who can go through your background, create that immigration plan for you, and outline what the steps are that you're going to need in order to meet that goal.
And once you have a plan, then it's about execution. And it sounds like it's common sense. Everything we tell you is common sense, right? But it's just because it doesn't mean it's easy to do. You have to have the determination to get there. You may have to study for your IELTS or something, and even if English is your only in first language, still study for it, because it's a long exam and they test on how well you can do the exam. I have a lot of people whose first language and only language is English, and they don't get what they're supposed to get on the exam because they haven't prepared. Prepare for your exams. Look at the programs that you're taking and make sure they are. You may or may not need to do another program, but you should know. If you do need to, keep your eye on the ball, know what you need to do in order to get promoted. If that's your number one goal, then have the determination to get there. You need to get that job offer, you need to get that work experience. Make sure you have enough time on your work permit to do that as well.
On that note, right from the beginning, we talked about this today. Make sure that you stay in status. So as long as you're here in Canada, really important to keep your temporary resident status. Without that status, it becomes a lot more difficult to, one, get it back, but two, apply and meet those long-term goals of permanent residence. And the second part of that is, when you're applying to extend, when you're applying for your study permits, any type of immigration application you're doing here in Canada, be very careful. It's very, important that you're not misrepresenting yourself to IRCC, because that can cause a whole other range of issues, including a 5-year bar from being able to apply to Canada. Now, when we talk about misrepresentation, it can be an innocent mistake, and not understanding a definition of a spouse can still lead you to be classified as having misrepresented yourself. So again, really important. I think it goes back to point one here. Speak with a professional who's able to guide you through that process, really advise you how to properly apply, and can really work with you to meet those immigration goals.
And finally, if your application is rejected, hopefully you would have been working with a lawyer so that you don't get yourself into that situation. But if your application is rejected, contact a lawyer right away. Not a consultant, contact a lawyer, okay? Only lawyers can go to court. There's a very strict notice period. If you get rejected in Canada, your decision is made in Canada, you only have 15 days to file the notice with the federal court to challenge the decision. If it's outside of Canada, it's 60 days, okay? I told you guys, don't talk to your friends and ask them for advice. The second thing is, don't just call the call center for IRCC and ask them for advice, okay? The call center is not on your side, nor are they held accountable for advice that they may give to you. They have often given wrong advice, and even if you follow their advice and you say, well, you gave me the wrong advice, IRCC doesn't care, okay? Oftentimes when you call the call center, you say, oh, this is not fair. They say, oh, okay. I'll just write a note to you for your case, or you can just send in a note and file it and let them know, okay? It's not that easy. The IRCC officers, if they take a look at whatever notes the call center put in or whatever you submitted, it may or may not be enough because you don't know exactly what you're supposed to do, and they may reject it. If at that point you go to a lawyer like me and you say, hey, Elizabeth, this is what happened. Can you help me now? And I say, well, my hands are tied with regard to filing a reconsideration. So you have one chance to go and ask another officer to reconsider your situation. But if you've already done so, either by the call center doing it for you or you just filing something yourself, IRCC is not going to look at another reconsideration. Okay. Also, there are strict timelines with regard to restoration or time when you can apply for a postgrad work permit. So don't waste time. Contact a lawyer right away. Okay, so here's the information. If you wanted to schedule an appointment to have a consultation with us, we do everything through Zoom. We will let us know you've attended this webinar and we will give you a discount. Our discount rate is $100 an hour for students who have attended our webinar from Mohawk. Okay, we have a few minutes left, 15 minutes left. Let's try to run through some of the questions that we've received on the Q&A.
Perfect. So the first one, Elizabeth, is for students who are, so let's say, I'll give you an example, I'll change this into a bit of an example here. I'm finishing my program in April 30th, let's say. My study permit is valid until May 5th.
Okay.
Do I need to extend my study permit? And if so, how long can I extend it for?
If your study permit is valid and like after you are likely to get a notification that you get the transcripts and the letter from the school to say that, to allow you to apply for the postgrad work permit, you may not need to extend it. But let's say the school may take longer than, when your study permit expires. I would highly recommend that you apply for an extension of your study permit. And normally the study permits should be good for 90 days after you finish the completion of your program.
Right. So when you submit that extension application, you can request it for not just to the end of your study program, but 90 days post that to give you time.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, so I have a question here. It says, my passport will expire during the postgrad work permit I guess it's normally they would be eligible for 3 years, but let's say their passport expires 1 year in. Should they renew it before they apply, or what's your
yeah. So I mean, if you're able to renew your passport before you apply for your postgrad work permit, great. That means that you'd be able to get the postgrad work permit for the full, let's say 3 years when you submit your initial application. If you're not able to renew your passport, though, because some countries don't allow you to renew it too far in advance, then when you apply for your postgrad work permit, the work permit will only be valid up until the expiry date of your passport. But once you do get your new passport, you can submit an extension application to get the rest of that postgrad work permit that you would have initially gotten based on your studies.
Now, does that impact the study permit or the visitor visa?
No. So even if your passport number that's on your study permit is different than your current passport number, that's fine. If you're from a visa required country and the visa's in your old passport, then you'll need to have both passports with you when you're traveling, because the visa would be part of your old one and you have your new passport. Elizabeth, does restoration applications apply for open work permits for the spouse as well?
Every person has to apply for restoration of their own status. So for spouses, they will only get an open spousal work permit when you have a postgrad work permit if you have a high skilled job offer. Okay, their work permit is good until the end of their work permit. Even if you finish study, their work permit is good until the end of the work permit. For them to apply to extend their work permit, you need to have a high skilled job offer. But if their status has ended, they have to apply for restoration for themselves. You can't just go and apply for yours and assume that it applies for them as well. Okay, I think we've already answered that visa question. How does someone confirm if they have the right knock position?
That's a great question. I mean, so IRCC does have all the knocks listed online. When you're looking at knock codes, you want to look at the lead statement, you want to look at the main duties of the knock code. And what IRCC considers to be your knock code is the one where you're performing the duties that are listed, performing the majority of the duties that are listed in that description, along with the lead statement that's put in the code itself. Elizabeth, can I apply for my study permit extension 6 months before the expiration?
Now that's a good question. See, normally the government wants you to apply within 4 months of an expiry of your permit. Oftentimes before in the past, they might return an application saying it's too early. That being said, with the current backlogs, you could try, because it could take a while for the government to get to the study permit. So, I don't think it really hurts to try to apply for the extension of your application 6 months before. Okay, so they need to apply for an extension for themselves and the dependents. Do they need to first apply themselves and get their extension approved before applying for the dependents?
This will definitely be a little situational, just depending on your particular circumstances. But, assuming you're here on a study permit, your family's here with you in Canada, they have maybe a spouse as an open spousal work permit, children with study permits as well. If you're all here in Canada, you don't have to apply separately. You can submit everyone's extension applications at the same time. Okay, Elizabeth, the next question goes back to working on the study permits. So my course ends April 30th. I have a valid study permit till September 30th. Can I work after my course completes, or do I have to wait for the work permit?
Okay, so when you're finished your course, you are no longer a student. You're not a full-time student. That means you have to stop working. It doesn't matter when your study permit expires. You are not a student. You have to stop working at that point. Okay, you can start working again once you have applied for your postgrad work permit. You don't have to wait until you get the work permit. You can start working as soon as you've applied, as long as you apply within that deadline before your study permit expires and within 90 days of the completion of your program. Common law partner has a work permit, and they want to know, can he apply for a work permit extension, whatever skill so this person, I guess, doesn't have a high skill job. Can that common law person still apply for work permit extension?
Yeah, so when you have a spouse and you're applying for an open spousal work permit, and when I talk about the spouse, I'm including the common law spouse. When you're applying for an open spousal work permit based on your postgrad work permit, you as the international student who's now graduated needs to be working in a high skilled position in order for your spouse to qualify for the open spousal work permit. So if you're not working in a high skilled position, then you wouldn't be able to apply for the open spousal work permit extension for your common law partner.
I mean, you could apply to extend it, but your application, you can have maintained status. If you do have the high skilled job offer, you can always tell the officer afterwards, I now have a high skill, and they will issue it. But if you don't have the high skill job offer and your spouse applies to extend it, their application would get rejected at the end. Okay.
So for someone who's taking a 2-year postgraduate certificate, what level of Canadian educational credential would they be receiving in the express entry in OIMP systems?
It's not a level of Canadian. You have a 2-year postgrad certificate, you get a 2-year postgrad certificate. You may qualify for certain points because of that, or you might qualify, for example, in your international student stream. So it really, what you should do is come for a consultation. We can talk about, your plan for permanent residence in that situation. Okay, so how long does the postgrad work permit processing take? And again, can you work during that? You and the partner work during that time?
So the processing times for applications do vary. Right now, we're seeing it take about 5 months inside of Canada when you're applying for your postgrad work permit. Again, like Elizabeth talked about earlier, assuming that you held a study permit the day that you submitted your postgrad work permit application, you would be able to work while you're waiting for the postgrad work permit to be issued. For your partner, the one that's applying for assuming they're applying for an open spousal work permit extension, the partner would, again, be on maintain status based on their previous work permit. So that would allow them to continue working while they're waiting for a decision on that extension application.
Now, normally in most cases, we recommend applying inside Canada because, if you don't need to leave Canada and you're fine to wait 5-6 months, you can start working right away when you apply. It's not a big deal. Sometimes there are other ways to apply. For example, you can go to the port of entry and apply by flagpoling. A lot of the times, though, for example, Niagara is super busy these days to get the work permits. You could try, but there may be a lot of, they may turn you away. You can apply at the airports, etc. If you need to get your postgrad work permit right away, if there's specific reasons, then we can certainly discuss what the plan would be for you to get a postgrad work permit earlier than the inside Canada route.
Okay. So I'm just gonna, I know we only have a couple minutes left, so I'm gonna pick a couple, one that we're seeing come up a bit here. Elizabeth, can I apply simultaneously to different categories in express entry and provincial, different provinces, different provincial streams?
Yes, you can, for the most part. For example, you can apply for express entry, you could apply for provincial nominee programs, whichever one you get. You can only get one PR, but you could do both simultaneously. You may or may not need to do it. It just depends on the plan for you, but that is possible to do. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, but what if I'm looking at different provinces? So right now I'm in Ontario. I'm thinking of moving to Alberta. Can I do both of those at the same time?
So provincial provinces are very jealously guard their nominations. They only get a certain amount of nominations, and they want to make sure that a person that they nominate intends to live and stay in their province. So if you go and leave the Ontario and you go and work in Alberta, your application, whether or not it's been approved or not, will get rejected, even if it's approved with the federal government. And so you need to make sure that if you're going to apply at a provincial nominee program, that you're going to stay within that province until you get nominated. Until you get permanent residence. Even after you're nominated, you still have to stay with it until you get permanent. Once you have permanent residence, you do have the freedom of movement rights, and you can change your mind. You can leave the province and live elsewhere. But until you get permanent residence, you have to stay within the province. All right, one last question. One last question. Does LMIA affect the OINP employer-based programs?
No, it doesn't. There's no real points that are awarded based on whether or not you have an LMIA. There are points for having a work permit, but there are no points that are specific to whether or not you have an LMIA.
And I just like to caution you guys on thinking that it's very easy to get an LMIA. It's very difficult to find an employee who's even willing to do an LMIA. And B, it can be difficult for an employer who is willing to do an LMIA to even get an LMIA if you don't have specific skills, or if the occupation is not in demand and is in need of workers to work in that position. So don't assume that you can get an LMIA, okay? We'll have to take a look at your situation and do a plan for you to do so. All right, guys, so our time is up. It was fantastic being here with you guys again. Thank you so much, Husam.
No, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Obviously, valuable information as always. I'm sure all our students really attain some valuable knowledge related to their situation. So thank you so much. Look forward to having you again, obviously, very, very soon. And I really recommend for everyone to reach out to Elizabeth and Zia for any immigration related questions. Obviously, you get a discount. Elizabeth, is that the
Yes, that's
the
right.
offer? There you go. So
All right.
again, thank you so much, Elizabeth and Zia, and thank you everyone for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Take
Thanks.
care, everyone.
Okay, take
Bye.
care.